Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly news recap. We are your hosts, Jacob Smith,
And Matt Morgans.
here to break down some of the biggest and most interesting stories of the week in the gaming industry. As usual, we're always looking to answer audience questions and implement audience feedback, so if you have any of either, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. But let's jump into it. Let's jump right into it with some news about Apex Legends. As usual, been a hot button topic on the show for a few weeks now, and Matt, some more developments regarding Respawn's newest title.
Indeed. So EA just recently held their latest earnings call where they discussed their plans for their various projects with their investors. And the transcript of that call becomes public after it happens. And so we learned from that call that EA is in some stage of working on bringing Apex Legends to mobile.
Okay.
Which is not entirely surprising. Certainly, like their biggest competitor being Fortnite is obviously already on mobile, and there are other battle royales like PUBG that have made their way to mobile as well. So it was, I think, a matter of time before Apex moved to mobile. We don't know what stage they're at with moving to mobile. They haven't announced any sort of release date or release window. But we know it's officially in the works, and they're in some stage of working on it. So we know that we're gonna next get our big sort of dump of Apex info at EA Play. They said they're going to be announcing details of Season 2 and things like that. So maybe we'll hear more about a mobile port at that point.
Yeah, and I think a port to mobile only makes sense, as you said. Fortnite did it, so Apex should if they're looking to compete.
It does open them up to a whole other market, and I think for sort of the not to suggest that it's a casual game, but the sort of casual audience that has been attracted to Fortnite on mobile, I think that is an audience that's potentially open to Apex.
Yeah, definitely. They're probably trying to capitalize on a young audience as well. Primarily, like you said, casual players and young players are who are drawn to battle royales, and I'm sure it's the case with Apex as well. Granted, it probably has a bit more of a mature audience than Fortnite, considering Fortnite caters to children and teenagers
purely
primarily.
Aesthetically, it's not catered to sort of as general an audience. It's got more of a sort of mature shooter feel to it.
Definitely. But I think regardless of that fact, going to mobile will lend to its popularity and to its profitability for EA, which of course we all know they're all about.
Certainly. And indeed, the other thing that came out of this investor call was that Apex Legends will also be coming to the Chinese gaming market. The game hasn't officially released in China yet. But they are apparently at some stage in negotiation to launch it in China. Obviously, China's gaming laws do require them to go through some to jump through some hoops to get the game released, especially with some new restrictions and regulations that were brought in last year. But it does sound like they're on the way to bringing the game to China, and I think at this point it's probably only a matter of time before it does release.
Yeah, and just another smart move by EA. I mean, it's a cash grab for sure, but it's not anything devious. It's not anything skeevy. Really, just moving into a new kind of untapped market, or relatively untapped.
Certainly. I mean, the Chinese gaming market is the largest gaming market in the world.
Yeah,
it's a very, very sensible business plan to release the game in the country if you're able to.
Absolutely.
I know that some gamers are concerned with the amount of cheating and hacking that kind of goes on in China.
Of course.
And that's definitely a fair concern. And I think, Respawn has been very serious about tackling those kinds of problems since launch. And they've had pretty good progress, especially in the last few weeks, with their use of things like hardware ID bans that have proven to be quite effective. I think that those concerns over the potential release in China are probably a bit over the top, because there's already a problem of Chinese gamers hacking and cheating in Apex, and the game hasn't actually released in China. So clearly the people who are cheating and hacking don't need the game to be released officially. So I don't think that we're going to see a commensurately large increase in the number of cheaters and hackers in China if the game officially releases. I think we're just going to see an increase in regular players.
You know, when you think about it, when you get past the gut reactions about how you may feel, how gamers may feel about bringing a lot of Chinese players into the fold in regards to cheating, I think you make a good point in that Respawn has done a great job in stifling that. I mean, they to date, I think the last number was 700,000 accounts banned
Yes.
for cheating, and they've been rooting out IP addresses so they can't just go and create new accounts.
Yes,
so I think.
The hardware ID bans in particular have been very effective at just kind of shutting down a machine.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think Respawn's on top of it. I think they know what they're doing, and I think they know what they could be exposing their game to. But like you said, they've already been combating Chinese hackers for some time now, and the game hasn't even been released there. So overall, I think this is probably just a strong move for the game's longevity.
Yes.
And in regards to some more pressing news and some really interesting news, a senator, in the U.S. senator from the state of Missouri, Josh Hawley, has introduced a bill to ban loot boxes and microtransactions, specifically in games targeted for and made for children. The blatantly named the Protecting Children from Abusive Games Act will be introduced to the Senate relatively soon. As I said, it specifically targets games made for and marketed to kids. And what I find interesting about this particularly is Senator Hawley's statements. He's said, when a game is designed for kids, game developers shouldn't be allowed to monetize addiction. And when kids play games designed for adults, they should be walled off from compulsive microtransactions. Game developers who knowingly exploit children should face legal consequences. We've seen a lot of political rhetoric surrounding games in the past few decades. What do you make of this latest development?
Well, the issue of loot boxes is definitely a serious one, and I think that there's a strong argument to be made to ban loot boxes specifically altogether. I wouldn't go so far as to extend that to microtransactions. I can see the argument of keeping microtransactions out of games specifically designed for children. So I certainly agree with that point. I certainly think that there's a debate to be had, and I think that in the context of that debate, the facts are definitely on the side of getting rid of loot boxes and other elements that do intentionally exploit things like gambling addiction and the kind of psychology of gambling.
Absolutely.
The problem with this is that I just don't think that this is coming at it from the right direction, and I don't think the senator knows enough about the specifics of this issue to adequately argue the case against loot boxes. His decision to frame it around children is just very, very reminiscent of the moral panics that we saw in the US in the 80s and 90s around games like Mortal Kombat. And the gaming audience is not going to respond positively to an issue being framed as a moral panic. And if that's the extent of his understanding of the issue, if he doesn't actually understand the mechanics of how developers are actually exploiting things like loot boxes, then it's going to be really easy for the developers, well, more the publishers, I think, who are in favor of this, to kind of dance rings around him when it comes to the argument, and maybe make a few small concessions and make it seem to him like they're making changes while really just kind of shifting things around.
I think that's all quite likely, and I think, as you said, it's hard to gauge how well Senator Hawley really understands things like this. It's pretty clear, judging by the information gathered by by talking with Zuckerberg in the Facebook trials
Yes,
sometime last year that the U.S. senators are not exactly the most knowledgeable when it comes to media platforms and technology and
For sure.
modern ideas and systems such as microtransactions and video games, because I'm sure they've done their due diligence in trying to keep up with the video games industry, but unless you're a part of that, an active part of this industry, or have been really deeply involved in it for some time, I think it's hard to really understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
And again, this bill is so new. We don't know where it's going. We don't know if he's got any real research to back this up. We don't know if Senator Hawley has really spent the time, dedication to look into this. But as you said, with his targeting of games specifically meant for kids, it does feel like this comes from a place of more visceral reaction of think of the children, won't someone think of the children, as opposed to, hey, these are very predatory means, this is how they're being executed, and this is what we can do to rectify them.
It's also sort of distorting the argument, which it's almost saying either that adults are not at risk of gambling addiction, which is flat out ridiculous.
Far from the truth, yeah.
Exactly. Or it's saying that I don't care about gambling addiction in the context of adults, which is troubling in its own way. So I think that the framing of it around children is needless and maybe designed to just get attention. I don't think it's necessary in the context of this debate. As I said at the start, I think this is absolutely a debate that needs to be had, but I don't think framing it around just games designed for children is a good way to approach the debate. I think the debate needs to be done about the issue of loot boxes in general in the industry. I think pointing to any one instance of loot boxes leaves the rest of the problem for the developers to exploit. And I don't think that games designed for children are the primary place where loot boxes are appearing.
Definitely.
I think it's primarily in larger AAA titles which are designed for more general audiences or adult audiences.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point in the fact that Senator Hawley is not entirely informed as to the state of the games industry and the state of where these things are most prevalent. I don't know. I think
it's certainly not to say that children are not at risk from things like loot boxes. It's absolutely something that should be considered a priority in the debate, but I don't think it can be the only thing that you have the debate about.
No, and I think when you center your debate around that, it feels like, I don't want to assume that his intentions are predatory, but it feels like he's aiming to get a visceral reaction out of people and to spark outrage at the fact that, oh yes, you're right, like our children are being targeted, whereas it's a much more multifaceted issue than that. And I hope they can address that, because if they can't, again, it seems reminiscent of an era where everything about video games, every new thing video games tried to do, people were again talking about, think of the children, instead of really truly understanding the mechanics of the systems that they were trying to dismantle.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we won't know until we hear more about the bill and if it actually does start to get more kind of partisan attention. But I'm concerned that he'll resort to the kind of tired old kind of rhetorical tropes of violence in video games and things like that, which have been fairly conclusively disproven, but are still very much in the forefront of some of the older political figures in the US.
Which are most of them, to be fair.
Yes. And I don't think that approach is going to make him popular among actual gamers. And this is an issue that I think gamers would be on the side of someone making this argument if they make the argument properly and they make the effort to understand the industry. So I think we'll have to see, but I must say I'm not enormously hopeful about this particular bill.
No, especially when you consider, again, the track record of U.S. senators and U.S. politicians really understanding the various systems at play in modern technologies. But again, we'll see. This is still in its infancy, and it could go anywhere. Hopefully to a conducive place where we can really involve a constructive conversation around the issue instead of targeting gut reactions from people and targeting these emotions.
Yes.
But just as something interesting worth noting and we're thinking about. In other news, in other God of War news, actually, the Raising Kratos documentary was actually just released, something that I was looking forward to since its announcement, and I know you got some information regarding that.
Yes, so I actually had the opportunity to watch the documentary last night, and it's a really, really good documentary. It's they billed it as being a full-length documentary when they announced it, and nobody was really sure exactly what that meant. What that means is that it's almost 2 hours long. And it's currently available free to watch on the official PlayStation YouTube channel. I think it's gotten a few tens of thousands of views, and it's only been up about a day. So I think this is definitely going to prove pretty popular. And it does a very good job of kind of charting the development of God of War really right back from its earliest conception in sort of 2013 through to release and the sort of subsequent acclaim that it received, and it's very well composed from sort of a mix of footage that was taken at the time in studio and interspersed with interviews that were done, I think, throughout development or after, and it touches on a lot of things ranging from the composition of the music to the emotional stresses felt by people in development to the decisions that they had to make in the kind of latter stages of development when they started realizing they were running out of time. It does a really good job of kind of showing the full development of a massive game like God of War.
That's interesting. I don't think it's easy to really capture that scope in its entirety. And I appreciate the genuine effort and the willingness of the dev team, of the relatively big dev team, tasked with creating a sizable game, to be as transparent as they are. I think that's really important for the health of the industry. And I'm looking forward to watching it. It sounds like it's going to be as awesome as it looked upon initial release. And of course, Cory Barlog is such an easy guy to like.
He's in it a lot, and he's very likable throughout.
Yeah, and I appreciate that transparency. I think it takes a lot of a lot of faith in consumers to trust the process and then to say, here's what we did. I promised, we would be transparent about this. And we have been, and I think that relationship will only foster good things in the future. These are the types of things that they're encouraging to see, especially amid so many reports of crunch at major studios.
Absolutely.
Both recent and, last year. I think it's really nice to see, again, because you said they're high stress environments, and it's nice to see that a developer is willing to offer an honest look into such an environment.
Actually, one of the things that they touch on fairly early in the documentary was the fact that Santa Monica Studios was hit with layoffs. I think back in 2014 or somewhere around then.
I believe so, yeah.
Where they were essentially working on a big new IP with their main team, and they had a smaller team working on very early pre-production for God of War, and then that larger project was cancelled, and they suddenly found themselves with a team of about 100 people about 8 to 9 months early from when they thought that they were going to be getting that team, and they just didn't have the work for the team to do.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of kind of footage and stuff from that period about like the very difficult decisions that the lead developers had to make about sort of, who are we going to be able to keep on and what are we going to kind of be able to get them to do to actually make up for this massive change.
Yeah, I think that's awesome to be able to see that such unique problems offer an insight into how those unique problems were handled, because those are things that oftentimes, I mean, I know I don't really think about when I'm playing a game. I probably should, but I don't, and I think that's really telling of how we experience games and how we experience games
Certainly.
development. But nonetheless, a really cool documentary that absolutely everyone should go check out.
Definitely.
Like you said, a really multifaceted look into the development of one of the best games of last year. And then moving into some different news, but equally as important, I know you got a lot of new information about what Streamlabs is doing to help streamers in general.
Yeah, so Streamlabs has just made a new announcement. They've just made a new partnership with Loots to essentially make a new feature for their existing Streamlabs OBS,
Okay.
which will, what they're hoping will kind of help streamers to make a living. So what this is going to add in is a thing called Loots to the Streamlabs OBS, and it's going to be the first completely free app on Streamlabs OBS. So any streamer can download this as part of their Streamlabs suite, and once you have it it's basically a system to enable sponsored messaging. So essentially sort of 15-second screen time advertising, which is activated on demand by the streamer.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then the Loots system will then generate revenue at the end of every month based on a whole load of different factors, which range from the number of people who were watching, to the number of times that you played a sponsored message, to the number of people who engaged with the thing immediately after. Because I believe there's a system where essentially the I think it's that viewers can send direct messages to the streamer without having to donate anything immediately after a sponsored message. And that was sort of one of the pros of having this in. It kind of gives an advantage to viewers and streamers equally.
Mm-hmm.
So, sure, the viewers are having to watch a 15-second message, but they then don't have to make a donation to send a direct message to the streamer. I think that's how it works.
Nice. That sounds really cool. That sounds like a unique way to kind of integrate fan interaction with streamer support.
Yes.
In a way that isn't as necessarily heavily taxing on viewers. But yeah, I think this is an interesting system to implement because, I mean, how could anyone really be against it? Like, if you're watching a streamer, you want them to be able to keep their lights on, to keep their fridges full. And so I think if this is another way to do that, I don't see why fans would be critical of it. If anything, I think they'd be able to praise it for being such a good way to streamline that support directly to their streamers.
Yeah, and one of the other positive things, we don't have like a full list of all of the advertising partners, and obviously the advertising partners are going to change from month to month, but specifically the two things they cited as sponsors working with Loots are specifically AAA game publishers and smaller indie game studios.
Okay.
So it sounds like they're mainly kind of approaching companies that already have a direct connection with gaming as advertising partners. So it won't just be sort of unrelated commercial advertising.
Interesting.
Sounds like it is going to be fairly sort of gaming specific.
I like that.
At least primarily. And I don't know if streamers will be able to custom tailor the partners that are being advertised. I don't have the full details on how that's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't surprise me if that were a feature to some extent. There's also there are some limits on how much you can earn using this system, and I would guess that that's probably to stop the sort of much bigger streamers from just kind of eating up all the revenue themselves.
Just monopolizing that whole system.
Yeah.
Doesn't really
so basically,
benefit everyone.
It's capped at the maximum amount you can earn in a single 24-hour span is capped at $100, and the maximum income per month is $3,000.
I mean, that's not bad though.
No, that's a perfectly, I with them saying that this will help streamers make a living, if that is the kind of standard cap, even half of that is definitely a pretty nice boon to your existing streaming income through tips and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to make life a lot easier for the sort of lower to mid tier of streamers using Streamlabs OBS, and hopefully kind of even the playing field and make streaming a little bit more accessible, and not so utterly dominated by the largest channels. Which actually, I believe on Twitch the bracket of, I think, top 10 to 100 streamers is more watched than the top 10. So, yeah, I think that's been the case for the last 2 quarters.
Interesting.
I'm not sure if it's changed on YouTube at all. But definitely, this may well help. I believe the 100 to 1,000 top channels was a group that was also growing in comparison to the other top 2 groups. So this should hopefully help to even the playing field a little bit for those smaller channels who, the one thing I think with this is that it might help people who want to go into streaming full time but can't necessarily quite afford to do it on the income that they're making through streaming, whether it's maybe just too unreliable, or just not quite enough for them to give up, whatever other job they're doing on the side. And hopefully this will make it a bit easier for people to make that transition to kind of commit to full time, because I think once people do that, it's much easier to start sort of focusing entirely on something and growing a channel. But obviously it's that gamble of, is it going to work? And you're giving up that security of having something kind of permanent and paid.
Of course.
And this is potentially offering that security, or at least something equivalent to it. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how this kind of affects the quarterly analytics when we get to Q3, Q4 of this year, to see whether we do see some growth among the sort of the less popular channel groups.
Yeah, I love any way that smaller streamers can help to kind of topple the monopoly of higher subscriber count streamers. Giving them tools to do that, I think, is really important across all platforms. So kudos to Streamlabs and Lutz for implementing those systems.
Absolutely.
And real quick, just to cap off our week, some news that I found irresistibly funny. In that the latest Ghost Recon title, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, was leaked, but not by any German retailers, not by any mysterious European outlets. No, it was done by Ubisoft's own online store. And that just put a smile on my face, because clearly they were gearing up for a big announcement. I mean, they added John Bernthal of The Punisher of The Walking Dead fame, so a big name actor, into Ghost Recon Wildlands as a sort of cameo / side mission that was added onto the game, in the last few weeks. So adding on to a game that's already 2 years old with a big name actor, you're clearly gearing up for some sort of announcement. But maybe they were gearing for an E3 time slot and just missed it by shooting themselves in their own foot.
Yes, certainly they seem to have been able to capitalize on it pretty quickly. I mean, they very quickly released a full trailer, and I think they then live streamed about 2 hours of gameplay footage. So that says to me that they were definitely kind of pretty close to being prepared to make this announcement. So whether they were going to announce it at E3 or maybe just ahead of E3, it does seem like this is maybe a bit earlier than they planned.
They definitely
So
capitalized on it.
Yeah, no doubt we'll see more of it at E3.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's almost certain. But their marketing team clearly knows what they're doing, because they just willingly spilled the beans at this point and gave us all the details on the game, which can be found anywhere. But I thought that particular story was just adorable, honestly, because usually it's leaks involve shadiness and how did this get out? But it sounds like Ubisoft knows exactly how this got out. And that is going to wrap it up for us this week. Thank you so much for tuning in today. You can find these stories and more all at VGR.com. We're constantly looking for ways to improve the podcast, so if you have any feedback or ways you think we could implement positive changes into the show, please let us know in the comments down below. Once again, I am Jacob Smith.
And I'm Matt Morgans.
And we will see you next week.